Welcome to the vaccine panel, and we have this controversial paradigm-shifting panel. They are definitely not slackers, they are experts in this arena. So we would like to, I guess the question that I want to ask all of them is what got them involved in this issue? But we'll be exploring the pros, the cons, and the states of vaccines today. The vaccine issue, as you all know, has become a convoluted war fueled by propaganda, big pharma, and an ever-increasing police state, where vaccinations are mandatory and public safety is secondary, and contraindications don't matter. So the mass demand for inoculations is coming towards us. Our panel of insiders and experts are going to share what's really happening inside the CDC and how public health, the pharmaceutical profit machine, and propaganda are colliding when it comes to vaccines and patient safety. So if you're confused about vaccines, for the mandatory passing of SB 277 in California, and you're worried about your health freedom, you are in the right place tonight. Stay tuned for this provocative, informative discussion. It's bound to get heated. So first of all, I'm Kelly Gallagher. I'm a 5-time cancer survivor, powered by my 6th pacemaker and a new heart valve. I think that I have, thank you, Beth. Every second's a test, but we're all here on vacation, and you just have to be happy. That's my motto. Yeah. So I actually think that I had a vaccine damage. You know, when I was born, I had a polio vaccine, and I think that that might have had something to do with me having Hodgkin's lymphoma 5 times. But we're not here to talk about me tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Larry Cook, who has stopped mandatory vaccination in response to California's SB 277. This activist went out and he continually raises public awareness about the dangers of vaccines and why natural immunity is superior to vaccination. Through his TV commercials, his parent interviews, his photographic memes, website, and ongoing Facebook posts. His website is www.stopmandatoryvaccination.com. He is a man on a mission and making campaigns that need to get out there for public awareness. Allison Jones. Allison educates audiences on how vaccines are made and the causal relationship to autism, SIDS, allergies, and the varying natures of viruses and bacteria through trackingvaccination.com, which is her website. Her mission, to translate complicated vaccine science into simple understanding. When I spoke to Allison on the phone, she has nonstop research and has a lot of interesting information that we all need to know. Karen Kane, my dear friend. Karen used to come to my talks with her daughter Lauren, which she's going to tell us the story about tonight. You all need to hear this. She's a highly respected parent, advocate for autistic families, and author of a unique, fully life lived, an empowering memoir about raising Lauren, her vaccine-injured daughter, for 15 years who was rendered blind, nonverbal, and quadriplegic an hour after receiving her first and only MMR vaccine. Karen speaks at conferences around the country, encouraging families how to joyfully raise their special needs children. It's KarenKane.com. We have Brandy Vaughan. Brandy's a former Merck Pharmaceuticals sales rep. Brandy founded the Council for Vaccine Safety in response to the industry's unprecedented push to eliminate medical choice with regards to vaccine. She recently launched the Learn the Risk campaign using billboards and other media to raise public awareness of vaccine risk. She's the mother of a healthy, vaccine-free 4-year-old. Her website is www.learntherisk.org, and she is also a chick on a mission, getting the word out there. Much needed. Dr. Tony Bark is the co-producer of BOT, a family physician advocating safe vaccines. It's says here there's more to be added, but I know that you are always on traveling and educating and taking care of children and families that are affected by vaccines. And you said to me earlier, it's not just about autism. It's about everything that comes with it. So we really look forward to hearing from you tonight, too. Dr. Andrew Wakefield. Highly acclaimed gastroenterologist, physician who publicly connected the possible link between the MMR vaccine and autism in 1998. As co-founder of the Autism Media Channel, Dr. Wakefield continues to publicly campaign for the rights of the skyrocketing number of families with vaccine-injured children, and he advocates safe vaccines. He is the director of the Autism Media Channel. This man is a man on a mission, and we're going to hear about all that he's up to, too, and the film that is in production later this evening. Wendy Silvers. We brought, not only is she a rock star with Million Mamas movement, but also a practitioner at Agape and bringing light and love and a lot of other things that we need to this panel and to this issue. She's a thought leader, transformational life coach, author, parenting educator, and founder of and CEO of the Million Mamas movement. Wendy traveled 5 times to the SB 277 hearings at Sacramento in 2015. She met with legislators and speaks widely on education and advocacy for safe vaccines. Her father contracted Bell's palsy after receiving the flu shot, and then she co-organized and emceed SB 277 Health Freedom Rally in Santa Monica in 2015 that was heavily covered by the media. She is also on a mission, and we are grateful to have her. And I'm going to ask Wendy for that special favor right now, because I think it's an important thing. This is a really heated topic with everybody's got their beliefs and their positions, and we were enculturated to believe one way or another. So if y'all don't mind, Wendy's an Agape practitioner, and I've asked her if she would give us a little prayer to start the evening.
Be my joy. Thank you. So I just invite everybody to close your outer eye and take a breath in through your nose and exhale with a... And how very grateful, how very thankful I am for the breath. For it reminds me that I cannot breathe in the future nor breathe in the past. I can only breathe right here, right now, in this now moments. How grateful I am to be breathed through. Grateful for the opportunity to recognize, to re-know, to remind myself that there is only one activity, and that is the activity of love that is everywhere in its fullness. That this love is pressed down, overflowing, indwelling, surrounding, saturating, permeating everything, everyone, everywhere, simultaneously. For there is no place, no space, no spot where this living, loving intelligence is not. It is the all in all. It is, I am. I am what thou art what I am. I am in love, and love is in me. And knowing that there is no separation between love and its expressions, I know absolutely and resolutely that right where each and every person on this panel is, right where each and every person in this auditorium is, right where Kelly is, right where Donna is, right where the children are, love is. Love is. Love is. Because there is no greater power than love. Love trumps everything. And so it is from this place of awareness that I speak my word, blessing this panel, blessing this issue, absolutely knowing that right action, divine and compelling right action and outcome is the very activity of this panel and the activity of this movement. That we have come together in a united state of consciousness to declare and to decree that our children are healthy, that we are healthy, and that we will only accept health and medical freedom, that we will accept right seeing, right knowing, and we will move steadfast in the direction of love, undergirding every thought, word, and action. And so with deep gratitude for Kelly, with deep gratitude for Donna, with deep gratitude for each and every person that has said yes, that has answered that sacred call to be a place and a space of love and truth with this movement and in their lives, I am so grateful, and I release this word into the law. I know that this is done. I know that a new paradigm has been born and is birthed, and we are earthing it. And in agreement, we say, and so it is. Amen.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. And I have one more. We had a beautiful addition tonight that wasn't in the program. Dr. Nick Delgado. He's a PhD, an ABAA-HP, American Board of Anti-Aging Health Practitioners. Directed the Pritikin Lifestyle Medicine Plan and served as Mastery Health Expert for Anthony Robbins, a USC graduate with studies at Loma Linda University and a major contributing author and forum leader for American Academy of Anti-Aging. He's authored 10 scientifically reviewed books on human health, including Stay Young and Simply Healthy Vegan Cookbook, yay, and then Nick Delgado is the expert host for popular show Simply Health TV and Wellness Academy. He's used microscopy and trained several physicians during his 40-year career on oxidative stress and free radical damage in the blood and the body. He's worked to help thousands to restore their immune system. He writes blogs and appears on several radio shows that are posted on fightvaccines.com. The FDA finally banned thimerosal in 2001 from the Rogaine shot, but too late for his son, Lance, given the shot in 1986, leading to serious brain damage and autism. Rogaine was used for the Rh-negative mothers and Rh-positive babies. When Nick was told his 5th child was on the autistic spectrum, he worked with Dr. Cherry Cardinal of mendingautism.com to ensure his son was protected from the risk of vaccines. Nick has created the site fightvaccines.com to help families make informed decisions about vaccines. Also visit nickdphd.com for web classes on health and your immune system. Thank you, Nick, for joining us tonight. All right, so we've got quite a panel up here, and they've got so many things to share with you. I wanted to first find out, we're just curious to know who's here and why you're here. Are there any people from the health profession here? Were we doctors, nurses, dentists? I see one I like. Veterinarians. How many parents, mothers, fathers? Of course. A non-vaccinated pets, of course. Absolutely. How many people have autistic children that are here tonight? How many are concerned about having a mandatory vaccine? Well, okay. So let's get started. I think, well, I think, first of all, I want everybody to introduce themselves and then tell you what they do and why they do it and how they got involved. So I'm going to start with Wendy on this side and just give, I think we've got 7 minutes. Is that the rule? Who's my timekeeper? Okay. So we've got 7 minutes. Timekeeper.
Will you do a 1 minute so I can wrap up? So hi everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you Donna for putting this together, and thank you Kelly for your tireless work. And I really acknowledge each and every one of you that are here to learn more and to be open to bringing it back into the community, because this is really a movement of unity. We've come together really to create and sustain a new paradigm. And it takes all of us being open-hearted, open ears, open mind, and really stepping forward fearlessly, and not so fearlessly, but knowing that we are supported. I am Wendy Silvers, and I came to this because I have an organization called Million Mamas Movement, and it's dedicated to empowering women, especially mothers, to stand in their sovereign power as change makers. And I'm also a life coach and a parenting educator. I'm trained in the principles of nonviolence, compassion, connection, and empathy. And I had a client come to me last February and ask me, do you know what's going on? And I said, with what? And they said that, well, there's a proposed piece of legislation that wants to mandate vaccinations for children. And that's all I had to hear was the word mandate, because for me, this isn't about, enforcing is not part of our government, that's militarism. And having enforcement by our government officials is really engendering militarism. So I began hosting meetings at my home And I met one of my running buddies, Dana Gorman, and we started traveling to Sacramento to all the hearings. I learned so much more than I really wanted to be perfectly honest. Because what happened was, even though I thought I was awake, I think I was still somewhat asleep. And then I began to learn exactly what was going on, the corruption, the deception, the disregard for children's lives, the disregard for mothers. I met thousands of mothers and dads, but primarily mothers that were just up in arms about their rights being taken away from them. And I was just so, I was stunned, I was shocked, I was horrified, and I was angry. I didn't understand how people could summarily sign up to allow their children to receive the amount of vaccinations, and that there would not be some sort of intervention. So I came to this because of the work that I do. I came to it because I'm a mom. And I have a teenage daughter, and I want her to continue to be healthy. I want her to have children. I want all of her friends to be able to have children, and I want the children to be healthy in the world. And I believe that, I became an older mother. I had my daughter when I was much older. But for me, I'm going to die, God willing, before my daughter. But the children inherit the world that we leave for them. So what are we going to leave for them? A world where it's dictated by the government, where we don't have a say, where mothers are being assaulted, their rights are being removed? Not in my world, not on my watch. And so I have been very actively involved in education and empowerment. Empowerment not from an angry place, not that there's not anger involved, but empowerment by being informed, empowerment by being inspired. Because if you are not informed, you cannot make a choice. And choice is a function of heightened awareness, and that's what we need, a heightened awareness. What can we do? Where can we go? Who can we talk to? How do we talk to legislators? How do we take action? And so for me, it's a daily recommitment to being of service to our children, to being of service to women and mothers and fathers who care so deeply, and to remember that people that vaccinate, they care deeply about their children too. They're just misguided. And so we have to find the commonality. We have to find a way that we can meet in the middle, and we can really uplift and transform this paradigm, not get stuck in the pointing fingers, because the old paradigm is that if you point a finger, you've got three pointing back at you. So we have to find a new way to reach people, and that means we have to elevate our own consciousness, because this would not have happened if there wasn't an agreement somewhere in our consciousness. And I believe that this is a spiritual opportunity. It looks like it's about getting into the mundane, and there's an aspect of that, we don't deny that, but this is really about a spiritual evolution. It's the evolutionary impulse for something new and greater to be birthed. And we are the midwives, we are the pioneers. So we have to be willing to do the inner work, and we have to be willing to show up. So that's what I am committed to doing, and that's what I'm committed to sharing. And so the Million Mamas movement is fully on board. And I welcome you to join me, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandy.
All right. Hello. Thank you for coming. So basically, what I want to start off with, because most people only listen to the first minute of what you say, vaccines do more harm than good. That's the most important thing you can take away from tonight. And I'm going to explain to you how I came to that conclusion. So, stepping back, I used to work for Merck. I sold a drug that some of you may remember. I sold Vioxx. It was a painkiller. It was on the market for 5 years. It caused anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 deaths, it's estimated. 7 billion in fines, largest drug recall in the world.
Hi, welcome back. This is Kory Muniz from the Longevity Corner, and I am here with the lovely Brandy Vaughan, who is an amazing, amazing woman who I had the pleasure of watching give testimony at a vaccine panel at the Conscious Life Expo yesterday. Brandy, thank you so much for joining us. Your information is invaluable, and I think a lot of parents need to hear what you have to say. Can you tell us your story?
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me on. Let's see. My story with vaccines started back actually when I was in pharma, before I had kids. I worked for Merck, and I sold a drug called Vioxx. It was an arthritis med. it was a very dangerous and deadly drug. It ended up in the largest recall, drug recall in the world. And during the court cases afterwards, it came out that Merck knew that it was causing a much, much higher stroke and heart attack risk in patients with Vioxx. And I quit before it was even pulled off the market. And what I learned from that experience was, A, that pharma has a lot of influence on our healthcare system and in our country. And B, just because something's on the market doesn't mean it's safe. And C, they twist the information and they cover up a lot of information. And so fast forward after years of living in Europe, which I went to after my pharma experience, and learning how things are done very differently in Europe, where I lived in a country, Holland, which is has a very natural health focus. Homeopathy is very popular, things like that. I had a natural home birth, which is quite popular in that country as well. And I took my son to the midwives, and they said, all right, some parents want to talk about vaccines. Do you want to talk about them? I said, oh, he looks pretty healthy to me. Why would I need vaccines? And fast forward 6 months, and I bring my son home to San Francisco to a pediatrician appointment. And the pediatrician said, wow, he hasn't had any vaccines. We need to give him 20 shots, 20 vaccines. He's really behind. And I said, behind on what? He's perfectly healthy. He doesn't need any diseases injected into his body.
Did they want to do all 20 at the same time?
I don't know, I didn't get that far. I knew enough from my pharma experience that was a huge red flag. And I knew enough not to trust doctors, to be honest. I sold to pediatricians a drug that didn't even have any efficacy against a placebo. So I very, very weary of doctors in general after my pharma experience. So I asked him to see some inserts, and he didn't like that. He said, but I'm the doctor here, you can listen to me. And I said, well, I've sold drugs to a lot of doctors in my day. I would like to see the inserts. And he just stormed out of the room. Nurse came in and said, all right, well, we will see you next time. And that was a huge red flag for me. And I hadn't actually done a lot of research on vaccines because I was away in Europe and I wasn't here for this big, this increased push for vaccination. So that was almost 5 years ago. And I have been researching vaccines ever since. I started to speak out against them because my son is vaccine-free now. I started to speak out against them because of SB 277, which is the forced vaccinations to attend public or private school in California, and we're based in California. And my son is in the first class affected by that law. It's now a law. So I started speaking out against it at the Capitol and at hearings, and when that was going through the legislative process in California, and did protests and speaking events and speeches. And unfortunately, Governor Brown signed that into law, even though there are tens of thousands of parents speaking out against it and really trying to activate and push back and basically telling the legislators, hey, you guys work for us, not for pharma. And the legislators behind the bill had gotten a lot of money from pharma and all of this. So it did become law, and in response to that, I just, I knew that this is my calling and this I had to do. And I knew my life wasn't going to ever look the same because you don't work for pharma and then come out against them, and they don't make your life easy. But it's what I'm here to do, and all the pieces of my puzzle fit together. So I launched a nonprofit, and it's called the Council for Vaccine Safety. And its goal is to raise awareness of the risks and the dangers of vaccines, because they actually do far more harm than good in our society. And we have the skyrocketing rates of childhood illness and issues that other countries with much, much lower schedules don't see. And take that one step further, when I had received enough in donations, I launched a big marketing campaign, because that's what we're going to have to do to really raise awareness on a broad scale to push back against this law. So I launched the Learn the Risk campaign, and it's at www.learntherisk.org. And it's been very powerful, and it's gotten a lot of attention, and we have a huge Facebook presence and also billboards. 7 billboards launched in the Bay Area around the Super Bowl. And we had mainstream media in the Bay Area papers did an article on it, front page of the local sections of
I heard about that.
8 Bay
That's
Area papers,
wonderful.
and on the radio. And that was actually the second campaign of billboards. But yeah, I'm planning to take this when the donations come in nationwide. There are a lot of other states that are interested, all throughout California as well, because we really need to raise the awareness and get this information into people's hands, because we've been taught in our society to trust doctors. They're the experts. Don't question science. Don't question doctors. And having seen that from the inside, I will tell you unequivocally, question doctors, question the science, because it's now 80%, 85% bought and paid for. Question everything. And I can't imagine what is more sacred than our body. And we are losing the rights as to what we put into our body. And as a fundamental human right, I can't imagine anything more important than this issue.
I have such a hard time understanding that people are up in arms about gun registration, but yet they don't care that they're taking these highly toxic chemicals and shooting them into their children's arms. It blows my mind that they can't understand. They're saying, oh, well, we have the freedom. Well, we also have the freedom for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and none of that can happen if we, are constantly taking care of our children that are in wheelchairs, can't talk, can't think. I myself was in the entertainment industry for quite a while, and they would give out on the TV sets and the movie sets free flu shots every year. And one time I got the flu shot, which worked its way into a severe allergy, which worked its way within days into bronchitis, which then a few days later I had walking pneumonia, and it almost killed me. And when I went to the doctor, he had to secretly take me aside and say, well, off the records, yes, there's a correlation here, it is connected. And it was very terrifying. I have a son who's going to be 22 years old that had a vaccine reaction that has given him severe processing disabilities. And this child was sought after by Mensa. They wanted him to join, and he was tested gifted in first grade. And so I saw the decline. I see his attitude change. My father had a flu shot and ended up with a stroke within hours of being told he was perfectly healthy. And when I went to visit him in the hospital, the person in the bed next to him had the same scenario. It was after the flu shot. And for them to say that there's no correlation, it's got to be so frustrating for you, because you, like all of us at one time, bought in that doctors know what they're doing and the FDA actually tests these things. Can you explain to us a little bit about the process with the FDA?
Yes, it's very interesting, because I think a lot of people have this idea, well, it's on the market, it must have tested safe. Like, why would the FDA, an agency that is sponsored by our tax dollars, put something on the market and allow it to be given to the American public if it's not safe? And a lot of people think that the FDA actually does its own testing, and it doesn't. It relies on studies and testing done by the company that will profit off of that drug or the vaccine. And the interesting case about vaccines, which is even more of a glaring conflict of interest, is that with vaccines, they're classified differently than pharmaceutical drugs. So when I was a pharma rep, gold standard safety testing was, that was what you do. Every drug went under this. Double-blind, placebo-based, long-term studies. And some drugs get through the system, as we know, like with Vioxx. But vaccines, they go through far less safety testing, because they are not classified as pharmaceutical drug. They're classified as a blood biological product. So there are no gold standard, double-blind, placebo-based long-term safety studies. And this is so, just upsetting to me, because people trust the FDA to do this research, A, vaccines are not going through much safety testing at all. B, that any safety testing that's done is not done against a placebo, which is in science the absolute gold standard and in medical research. And so doctors, I mean, if they even knew just that one thing, you know vaccines are not tested against the placebo, they're tested against the additives that are toxic. Aluminum, like Gardasil, for instance, you can look at the insert and you see that in the 18,000 people that were in the study, that you have the Gardasil section, and then you have the section that was given a straight aluminum shot. Aluminum is the major toxic ingredient in Gardasil. And so yes, you see a lot of injuries, you see a lot of paralysis, a lot of life-altering injuries, a lot of death. But because it measures up to the aluminum shot, which is toxic, and they both have the same rate of injury and death, it's safe, and the FDA approves it. It is unbelievable to me that more people are not doing this research, and doctors who hold some kind of responsibility, they hold responsibility for this, for telling people that things are safe, when if they actually dug into the research, they would realize it's not. So FDA studies are conducted by the company that's going to profit off it, and so there's a glaring conflict of interest. The panel, the advisory panel that the FDA that recommends a drug or a vaccine to be marketed or not, which I wonder if they've even actually said no to a vaccine before. It's comprised of industry insiders, pharmaceutical companies, consultants to the pharmaceutical industry. Everyone, well, most of those people on that panel are in some way being funded by pharma. And so we have such a lack of regulation and such a lack of oversight. And one of the interesting statistics I have in some of my talks when I talk about pharma and the vaccine system is that the annual budget for the FDA is less than the marketing budget for one prescription, major prescription drug per year. So the annual budget of the FDA is less than one company's marketing budget for a drug.
One product.
Like one product. I mean, it is so minuscule compared to that, and we're putting our health and our safety into the FDA when there's so much conflict of interest in what gets approved and what doesn't. There's such a small budget, they can't investigate. They investigate hardly anything. They don't delve deep into the studies because there's just no funding and no manpower there. And then you have things like the new Fda Commissioner, which was nominated by Obama. He's still in the process. Dr. Cardiff, he headed Duke's medical research centers, and he took in millions of dollars in consulting fees from pharma. Even the New York Times has called out his pharma ties as a conflict of interest. And yet, he's still being considered. And I just, how could you trust an agency that's being run by an industry? And from the inside, I sit there, and this is why I do what I do. I want to wake people up, and I want to say, do you realize what's going on here? I mean, you cannot trust your doctor to do the research because they don't want to know that they're hurting people and that they're making money off that. I really, truly believe that they wouldn't be able to handle that ethically. Plus, they get a lot of money from keeping populations highly vaccinated from insurance companies and things like that. Sometimes even kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So as a public, we can't no longer just ignore the facts. We can't just keep doing what we're doing and blindly follow what we're being told.
Right.
We need to take back our own health. We need to do our own research, really in-depth research, not the research that's funded by pharma, not the Gardasil insert that says, oh look, Gardasil is safe because against this toxic aluminum shot, it killed the same amount of people. That is not safety. We need to really delve deep. We need to start listening to people like myself, like the doctors that are risking their lives, their lifestyles, everything, to come out and talk against this. The people who used to work at places like the FDA, some of the New England Journal of Medicine editor, she was an editor for 2 decades, Dr. Angel, she wrote a book on how the conflict of interest and the influence of pharma over medical journals and science these days.
It's my understanding that they actually write some of the medical journals.
They do. They actually have pharma ghostwriters that write the medical journals, and the doctors sign off on them in and they get funding for it, basically. So in exchange for signing off on these journal articles, they get their own projects that are, close to their heart paid for, or they just get a really huge bank account.
And it's my understanding that Senator Pan also got paid lots of money from the pharmaceutical industry.
There was a Sacramento Bee article that actually went through the main sponsors of the legislation, SB 277, and outlined how much they received in contributions from pharma. These are direct contributions. As I know from being inside of pharma, there's a lot of money being exchanged in other ways, either in benefits, in terms of like vacations, meals, these types of things, houses. There's a lot of money being filtered towards science and doctors and other people that can be influenceable. That is not necessarily recorded in hard cash, but he did get over $90,000 from pharmaceutical companies.
That's outrageous. And I know I was with a group of people that were trying to educate and get my fellow citizens to sign to stop SB 277, and what I came up with was a lot of, well, I got vaccinated, and I'm fine, so why should I care? My child's going to be fine. And I would always say, well, you're just the lucky one, because I have at least 3 vaccinated, injured people, including myself, in my life. My stepdaughter was injured from the Gardasil vaccine and almost killed her, sent her to ICU twice. And to be honest with you, she hasn't been very healthy since. And it's really sad for me to see, and you kind of scream this at a rooftop, which I'm sure you do as well, and just say stop and read. I send people to the CDC's own website where within 2 paragraphs it talks about the flu shot, one that you should give it to pregnant women and elderly people and children, and the next sentence, the next paragraph, it actually says it's not supposed to be given to pregnant women and children or the elderly. So it's like, yes, and when a parent goes in to see their doctor, this is about informed consent. We are supposed to have informed consent, and they are supposed to have those vaccine inserts to show us. Just like when you get a pharmaceutical and you go into the pharmacy, they give you information, they give you the pamphlet. We're supposed to have that, and we're supposed to be able to read it. And I think one thing that people need to realize is the reason why the responsibility was taken away from the pharmaceutical companies when it came to vaccines and our liability was lifted was because they knew that this was going to cause injury, and it even states that it is something that they cannot control. It's an uncontrollable thing that some people are going to get sick and some people are going to die. But they keep calling it for the greater good, and they keep bringing up this herd immunity. Can you address herd immunity and why it's a false thought?
Definitely. This is one of the things I hear most in my work that I do, trying to raise awareness. So herd immunity is interesting. It is only seen in in populations that naturally acquire a disease. So chemical immunity, because the raising of antibodies doesn't actually equal immunity, which, pharma likes to imply that it does, but it doesn't. Immunity is quite complicated. And there are a lot of things that you only get immunity from naturally acquiring the disease. And so herd immunity is only studied in natural populations where an entire population got the disease naturally. Again, naturally. And I think that one point that's really important here is that how our body assimilates a disease or a virus when we get it, and it's how we acquire it. So if we're out and about and someone has a virus, say the flu, and we receive it through either the nose, the eyes, or the mouth. That's how we naturally acquire a virus, right? And first, I want to say that a lot of the diseases and the viruses, we actually need to build up our immunity. We need to challenge our immune system so that we can fight bigger things in life and we can keep it healthy. It's like a muscle. It needs to be built up. So when we naturally acquire something, we're exposed to something, we take it in through the mouth, eyes, or the nose, and there's a natural filter process. So through the mucus, already some of that is filtered out. And then when it goes through the digestive system and things like that, it goes through natural detox processes. So we don't absorb the entire virus. When we acquire it intramuscularly or through a needle, and it's a chemical immunity, it has chemicals and toxic additives in there that are doing far more harm than good. And B, we're acquiring the virus in a completely unnatural way. And it's either a live virus or a dead virus, but the body doesn't recognize it because the method of introduction is different than we would see in a normal, natural scenario. So the body doesn't really know what to do with it. And so temporarily, some vaccines do raise antibodies temporarily, but that's not immunity. And you can still contract the disease, which is why we're seeing 75% of pertussis cases being in a vaccinated population. Because the vaccine, just because it raises antibodies, doesn't mean you're immune. And the body, because you're taking in the virus and you're exposed to it in a different way than is natural, it's more potent, so the body goes into real overdrive. Plus we're injecting 6 to 9 viruses at a time in babies and children. And then when we go in for boosters, usually 3 or 4, which that would never happen in the natural world as well.
Right, and things that were never tested together. So
right.
Not only were the MMR not tested together, which is in one shot, but if you take the DPT shot with the MMR and something else, none of those things have been tested together. So it's just
there are no safety tests on the combination. Every time there's a safety test, which we already know that has a very low level of low standard for safety testing. It's always one vaccine at a time, none given any time during the test period, which is usually only a few weeks or a couple months. But yes, so we're giving them in combination doses which haven't been tested, but also something you would never ever see. Your body would never see 6 to 9 or even 4 or 5 viruses at the same time. And so your immune system just goes into overdrive. And this is not even talking about the additives that they put in there, like the heavy metals to trigger the immune system, the aluminum and sometimes mercury and flu shots, and other stabilizers and preservatives that are known to be toxic in vaccine-relevant amounts.
So is there any question that this is linked to the huge rise of autoimmune diseases?
We are seeing autoimmune issues skyrocket. The latest stat that I saw, 1 in 12 women have a chronic autoimmune issue. Sometimes these lead to the body totally breaking down, and sometimes it leads to death. And it definitely is life-altering. When you have a chronic disease, be it IBS, Crohn's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, ALS, MS, all of these things are, the body's attacking itself because we're introducing a ton of viruses at one time with all of these, a huge load of chemicals as well, and the body is going, what is going on? We have never seen anything like this ever in the history of our species, and we don't know what to do with it. It's linked to cancer as well. Your body, we're all genetically different, so it's all going to express itself differently. Some neurological damage from the heavy metals, autoimmune issues, sometimes cancer, and there are studies, independent studies, not funded by the pharma companies, obviously, or the government, that show the correlation between that. But we're seeing huge skyrocketing rates that other countries that don't have the same schedule and don't have the same vaccine additives and don't give them in the same amounts at the same time, they're just not seeing these kind of rates. In fact, the US has some of the highest rates of issues in the developed world. Like we have the highest, one of the highest infant mortality rates in the developed world. Yet we spend more per capita on healthcare. So it's not because we just don't have the money. There is a strong correlation. We have the highest vaccine schedule in the developed world. We have the highest in IMR. We're one of the only countries that gives hepatitis B on the first day of life,
which is crazy.
Which is a sexually transmitted disease, and it's also through intravenous needles, and the risk of contracting that when you're low risk is absolutely infantile.
And then
We're giving it on the first day, and we have the highest first day death rate of newborns. Like, what is going on in our country?
And then there's a booster, which tells us right there, if you have to have a booster, then it's not working, and if it's not working, then why are we accepting these other adjunctives and the mercury and the aluminum? Why are we putting that into our body if it's not really even working?
Yeah.
And I tell people, they say to me, well, my vaccines work. I said, well, look, if you really truly believe that your vaccines work, then if I'm not vaccinated, it shouldn't mean anything to you. But on the other hand, I'm also aware that oncologists will hand out a slip of paper when you leave their office and they tell you you have cancer to not be around someone that's been vaccinated for 2 weeks, because they're going to outgas that bacteria, that virus. Whatever is in there, it's going to outgas, and you are susceptible to get it. So how they can come up with this whole idea of, I'm safe now because I'm vaccinated and you're a threat to me, is just crazy. Because if you believe in it, then you're safe, right?
Right.
So
one of the craziest things is the pregnant mothers that are saying, okay, we need all grandparents to get the DTaP vaccine before the baby's born. DTaP sheds for 4 to 6 weeks. So you're actually completely exposing that baby to pertussis by asking people to get, pertussis is whooping cough, to get that vaccine. You're automatically exposing that child to that, when in a natural situation, that child would have such a small risk of being exposed to it. But when you bring recently vaccinated people with DTaP around that baby, and you insist on that, like, you're automatically exposing that child to it. It shows how little research people do. And in fact, I did a meme online, and it's like, if you put the same amount of research into vaccines as you did picking a car seat, you wouldn't vaccinate, basically. I mean, that is, and we aren't seeing it. And I hear so many times, oh, but Brandy, I trust my doctors. And I just sit there and I say, please don't, because I've been in their offices. Not all of them. Some of them are great, but a lot of them don't. They don't do their own research. Pharma is all over medical schools these days. Sometimes some medical schools get up to 60% of their research donations from pharma itself and from pharma-funded programs in the government. And, I say, please, please don't turn your health over to someone who may not be doing their research, or maybe just went golfing or went to Hawaii with a pharmaceutical company, and that's where they're getting their information. Please don't. This is your child. This is our bodies. This is sacred. Like, don't just hand over our health, especially when we can see in our society how much we are suffering. And you go to the doctor, and, oh, well, I have lupus, I have, all of these different autoimmune issues, neurological issues. Oh, it's not related to vaccines, not related to vaccines. It's environmental toxins. We don't really know what it is. Environmental toxins means the amount of exposure you have to chemicals in our food, with GMOs, in our air, in our water. Well, guess what? Those are all ingested. They go through natural filter processes. You don't absorb it all. Those same things, those same contaminants, those same toxic chemicals are in vaccines, and they go intermuscularly straight to our vital organs. I scream from the rooftops to try and get people to connect the dots, because environmentally toxic diseases, cancer even, all of these autoimmune issues and neurological issues, vaccines need to be a part of the conversation. It's not just food, it's not just water, it's not just the air pollution. It is vaccines too, and they are even far more dangerous because the injection method is far more potent than ingestion, than eating and drinking. So I do what I do to try and wake people up and try to empower people to take back their health and do their own research and get out there and understand what they're putting in their bodies. You read food labels. Why don't you read vaccine labels? I trust my doctor. Well, don't, because they're not reading the vaccine labels either. These are our bodies. These are our children. We need to be doing our due diligence, and our children deserve it. We deserve it. Lifelong chronic illness, it is not fun, as you know. Like, these issues are real. They're happening at skyrocketing rates, and we need to step back and certainly not mandate vaccines. And then, do the risk benefit reward, and if you're like me, you'll come to the determination that vaccines do far more harm than good. period. Every single one of them. Herd immunity is only naturally acquired. It doesn't come from a lab, just like food doesn't come from a lab. You can eat food made from a lab, but you're not going to be healthy that way.
Right, absolutely.
So we need to take back our health and do our own research and really get out there and start to say no and start to push back, especially when they try to mandate vaccines. Like with SB 277, my son can't go to public or private school. And a lot of parents are in that situation right now, or they have young kids and they're going to be facing that situation. And it's just our fundamental rights are being taken away.
Right.
And we just have to start getting loud about this and pushing back, protesting, taking it to the streets. Millions against Monsanto should be millions against Merck and Pharma, and just really take back our health.
I totally agree, and I find that in talking with people, I'm seeing more resistance from the dads than the moms. Have you come across that?
Yeah, I talk on that too, but I think in our society we've really had, we've done a number on men, and we've taken away that intuition, and I think if someone comes towards you with a vaccine needle or any kind of needle, your instant is like a shudder, like whoa, whoa. Mm-hmm. But us women, intuitively, we connect a little bit more, and we've taught in our society men to disconnect from that heart, disconnect from intuition, and use the head. Science is the only thing that matters. But with that, it's funny because the pharmaceutical companies are saying, well, vaccine science is clear, the safety studies are clear. Anyone who actually looked into the science would see that the science is clear, but it's clear that vaccines are doing a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And
it's clear that it's making a lot of money for an industry.
Right. But I do think that, there's been this good brainwashing of society, towards, men need to be very science-oriented and not connect in with that intuition or any kind of emotional response. We need to be only driven by our head, and that's science, and science is clear. And yet they're actually not doing the scientific research, because if they were delving into the studies, in the inserts, the actual pharmaceutical studies, how they were run, the populations that sometimes, get a little filtered here and there, and into the CDC studies as well, which we actually have a CDC whistleblower now, a research scientist, Dr. William Thompson, that has come out saying that the landmark measles safety study was manipulated. The data was manipulated, and there was an increase in autism, ADHD, tics, and speech delays seen in subsets of boys particularly because the testosterone makes it harder to detox from the heavy metals in vaccines, and that there was a huge increased risk. And the CDC is covering it up, and now Dr. William Thompson has enacted federal whistleblower status to protect himself. Still works at the CDC, not allowed to talk to anyone, obviously. And we're trying to get Congress to subpoena him and do, really delve into CDC oversight, because clearly there is something going on there. Same with the FDA, clearly something going wrong there. And Congress needs to step up and do some oversight and really rework what's going on there. So I guess I feel like there is a little more resistance that men do have a little bit more resistance, because they're kind of taught to drive through, with the brain and the science. But if those men that actually look into the science and take that time and do the research, their minds are blown. And we have a lot of really well-versed men that are scientists, researchers. I have friends that are PhDs in biochemistry that are on our side. It's harder for some people to speak out because you do risk a lot right now. Lifestyle, doctors, there are a lot of doctors that don't vaccinate their own children, but they don't speak out against them because they would lose their health insurance status often, and they would take heat from pharma, possibly be investigated, the medical license, as Dr. Jack Wolfson was in Arizona for speaking out against vaccines. And there's a lot of heat that they can take. So there are a lot of researchers, a lot of scientists, a lot of people with those degrees. You just don't see them speaking out as much publicly, but we do have some that are speaking out publicly, and I have, there are a lot that are speaking out privately and don't actually vaccinate their children because they do know a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Brandy, I know that they have 271 vaccines in the pipeline, all of them which can be added to the list at any time because the law says that the government can add anything that they feel necessary. I do know that we now have the 21st Century Cures Act, which makes it so that although as parents we can't use anecdotal evidence, my child was speaking, got a shot, and now it's not. We can't use that to prove that we have an injury, but they can use that now to prove that it's safe. And when I heard that, I just was like, what? How can that possibly be? I can't use it to prove it, but you can use it to,
Right.
Push something through the FDA. How can that happen? So each year it seems like they have to do less and less testing and be less and less honest, and we don't care. News doesn't have to be real. Scientists don't have to say what's really happening. It's whatever who fills their pocket. And I think as someone that used to teach nutrition as a nutrition coach for LAUSD and saw middle school students every year get more and more dumbed down, get more and more able to sit for 10 seconds and focus on anything. And you see the garbage food, and they've come in and they've got their vaccinations and they're all happy and they're sick, and nobody is connecting the dots. And it's beyond mind-blowing that we would allow a government, we talk about Hitler and what he did. We are doing the same thing in this country to our populace. We are taking them and we are saying, you don't have a choice, we're going to inject your child with this. And then I hear people say, well, I'm going to go ahead and get a medical exemption. But that's not even a sure bet in any case, because it's almost to the point where the doctors are being told not to give those exemptions. And you have to pretty much be dying before they allow you to not have it. And I just read an article that in Australia, they're trying to get this law where it's even worse, where even if you had a sibling that had an adverse reaction or passed away from a shot, your other children still need to be vaccinated. Even if you have a health issue, you still need to be vaccinated. And to me, this just seems like it's rape. Because I'm saying, no, I don't want something to enter my body. And they're saying, well, smile, you're going to like it. You're going to be fine, really. You're asking for it. And it just is such a huge issue of freedom. It's a huge issue where parents can have their children taken away if they deny vaccines, and then they're going to vaccinate the child anyway, and then the parent goes to jail. We are hearing scenarios like this across the country. We're hearing companies looking for different ways to get these vaccines into our body. It's not about our health. And if it's not about our health, what is it about? Can you stop and think about that for 2 seconds? What is it really about if this really doesn't have anything to do with our health?
Money. It's all about money.
Cha-ching.
Our health is being sold to the highest bidder, and we are losing out, and people aren't connecting the dots.
And we have to.
And we have to, because there are 271, if not more probably by this point, coming under development, and they're coming after adult mandates. There's an adult mandate plan that they're trying to push through at the federal level, which requires over 150 vaccines over the course of a lifetime. And they're looking into different ways of mandating it through, if you don't have the full vaccination card, you can't get a driver's license, you can't get on a plane, you can't, all of these things. These are coming down the line. And I think that people, even those that understand that vaccines cause a lot of damage and don't believe in vaccinating themselves or their children, they still, I believe, but you know what, I'm safe, I'm good, whatever, I just say no. Well, actually, we have to take it a step past that now, and we have to start taking action, because these laws are going to come, and we can't just sit back and say, I think I'm fine, I don't have a kid in school or whatever, because they're coming for adults, they're coming for all different, through the employers, probably through health insurance companies and all of that. And medical exemptions are going to be severely restricted as well. Really, I was in Europe a couple weeks ago, and I had a French friend, and he's like, why don't you take to the streets? why are you not protesting? Why are we not hearing about protests against pharma, against this stuff? Why aren't you on the streets? Why aren't we hearing about this in the EU and in France? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, why aren't we on the streets? I'm on the street, but I can't do this alone.
Right, right.
Why aren't we marching on Washington in the millions? And I feel like people are going to sit back and not do anything and think they're fine until it comes for them, until finally, oh, your health insurance plan just sent you a letter and said, if you don't get these vaccines through this doctor that we designate, you no longer qualify for health insurance. Until it actually affects them, we're kind of apathetic about it. And I feel like people are going to wake up in the millions and be like, oh my goodness, I really wish I had done something before it's too late.
Right. Well, when they get big fines, because I just heard that there are several professors that are actually trying to get the government to instill fines on those that are non-vaccinated for the risk that they're causing. But, who's going to help me when my child gets sick from somebody that's shedding the vaccine that they've gotten? Nobody.
Right.
There's no recourse. And, I can't quote it exactly, but, there's a poem that basically states, well, they came for them and nobody said anything. They came for them, nobody said anything. Came for them, nobody said anything. And then they came for me and there was nobody left. And that's what we have to realize, that just because, I don't eat beef, but I'm still going to fight for your right to eat it, and I'm going to fight for your right to have it be healthy and not be genetically modified and not have it give you leaky gut syndrome. I'm still going to fight for that because I am a citizen of this planet, and I care about my fellow man. And we all need to stop being so selfish and look outside of ourselves and understand that we can only do this together, and not everybody has to do everything, but we all have to do something. And just posting things on Facebook, that's great. It opens people's eyes. It's a little bit of seed of knowledge, but it's just not enough anymore.
Yeah. It's, one thing I say is pharma never sleeps, and we can't either. We need to be out there on the streets. We need to be organizing. We need to be raising awareness on the street level. The billboard campaign that I launched at the higher level as well, just really getting everybody involved in this conversation. And at this point, it's interesting to see, like, when I talk about vaccines, it's like a 4-letter word. We need to keep those in conversation. We need to keep saying vaccines. You want to call me anti-vax? Go for it. Because, yeah, vaccines do more harm than good. Am I anti-chemical? Yes. Am I anti-making food in the laboratory? Yes. Because I'm pro-health. And I am pro-natural health, I am pro-health, I'm pro-life, lifestyle, and we need to keep these words in conversation. We need to keep the conversations open so that it becomes less controversial, less stigmatized, because that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to marginalize it. Oh, all of those, there's no science behind that. That's just Jenny McCarthy's followers. I've never even met the woman, never even heard her speak. I have a science background. I can read the studies because pharma taught me to. I can read the inserts. I have a science, I come at this from a scientific angle, and the science is so clear. It is these toxins that are in the vaccines, the combination of the vaccines, giving them in a way that's not naturally acquired. All of these things are coming into like this toxic soup, and are of course, the food as well, food and water and those chemicals. We all have a chemical threshold. Once we pass it, something is going to be triggered, and we're going to have some issues. But it's all combining, and we now have some of the sickest population in the developed world. And it's going to be too late soon, because once the laws are there, it is much harder to repeal a law and to fight a law, especially when it's backed by so much money, than it is to make sure that law never happens.
Yes, it's not impossible, but it is so much harder to do. And I think that what you're doing is, I bow to you. And you're risking everything to come out and do this and share this with people, and it warms my heart, because we need more people like you that have understanding and the willingness because people during the holidays, their friends and family were telling them, don't come over if your child is not vaccinated. So it's breaking up families. I think I heard at the vaccine panel, 90% of families break up because of these injuries and things that, they families just can't deal with them, or the husband divorces the wife because one wants to vaccinate and the other one doesn't. And this is just ridiculous. We have to understand that if we want to have a population, we have to not put these things in our body, because it is causing things, not only sickness, but infertility. Mm-hmm. And then from the standpoint, I have a friend that is a special ed teacher. How many kids, what are we going to do with these children that have to be in these special ed classes, especially when our government is doing two things at the same time, cutting back on special ed funding and asking for the Social Security numbers, the phone numbers and addresses and names of all the children, under the thought that it's going to help us decide who needs special education, when we know for a fact that they're getting rid of special education. So why we have to, as parents and as people on this planet, stop and say, well, if it doesn't make sense, then what could the other cause possibly be?
Yeah, and I think that the special education is an interesting issue. I talked with an occupational therapist yesterday at the booth. She came by the booth and she said, I have been an occupational therapist for 20 years, and we have just seen the amount of kids needing speech therapy with developmental delays, processing disorders, behavioral issues, just ratchet up, and up. And she's like, and it was almost like every time new vaccines were added to the schedule, you see a jump. And she's like, there are so many more kids nowadays having issues, having, neurological and developmental issues than we have ever seen before.
And I'd like to say to a lot of people out there that are voting in this election coming up, that if you don't believe that we should have more people on Social Security or on Medicare, Medi-Cal, having benefits covering their health, then let's stop creating unhealthy people that are not going to be able to have jobs, that are not going to be able to function and add into the system. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we don't want these social safety nets and then create a citizenship that is so unhealthy they can't function on their own. Brandy, is there anything else that you want to get out at this time?
I guess my biggest thing is just that, we can no longer hand the responsibility for our own health over to someone else. Pharma, the government, doctors. We need to do our own research. We need to figure out what is going on here, make the connections, connect the dots, and do this for ourselves and for our own children. And we need to take back our health, and we need to say no, and we need to stand up against these laws. We need to stand up for our rights. And I think our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves because we are losing fundamental rights, and we just need to fight back, and we need to do it today because we don't have time to waste. It's no longer an option to stay home or be active. I mean, we have to be active, or it's going to be too late.
So where can we find you, and what is the best way to get involved?
So the campaign is looking for volunteers to really help run grassroots teams, and as well as funding. We need major funding to get billboards across the nation. A lot of states want these. They have a lot of bills on the docket, and we need to get this information out there and push back against all the pharma propaganda. Mm-hmm. So www.learntherisk.org. There are so many ways to get involved through volunteering, hosting fundraisers, getting this information. There are free flyers on the website. There are postcards, billboard, bumper stickers, everything. Handing these out, leaving them on community bulletin boards, in tables, flyer tables at libraries and community centers, and getting this information to our friends and our family. Most of all, we need to speak out. And we need to show pharma that there are a lot of us. We're very numerous, and we don't believe health can be created in a lab. And we're going to say no. And we're very educated. We've done our research, and we know the science is very clear that vaccines harm, and they do more harm than good. And we need to get this information out there to everyone, and we need to come out of the closet and just do it loudly and proudly. We need to march. We need to do millions a million people marches on Washington, and we really need to make this happen. So
Well, I am with you, and I've got to say, anything, $1, 50 cents, $5, $5,000, $5 million, whatever you have that you can help with this cause, this is going to save humanity. This is something that is so very important. This is our children. We spend our time hopefully making sure that they have healthy food, that they exercise, that they get the right sleep, that they go to school and get educated without even notifying parents that they're getting these vaccines in school by the school nurse, that the children can do it and not let us know. So your child may come home and have symptoms and you won't even know what to tell the doctor. So please help. Anything that you can, time, money, influence, everything would help. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Brandy.
thank you for having me on.
You're one of my best friends now.
Thank you for everything you do.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Dr. Tony, please tell us
So I'm
about
Dr.
you.
Tony Barg. So I had a little bit of it was an evolution. I've been here, I've evolved into this position. I did go into medical school, not wanting to practice mainstream medicine. I thought I was going to practice Chinese medicine, but I wanted to affect change, so I wanted my medical degree. And I did train in pediatrics, and I also trained in rehab medicine, and I was offered the position as director of a pediatric emergency room out of residency, and I took it because I love adrenaline, and it suited my personality. I really liked it. But I did notice things, and at that time, I vaccinated kids in the vaccine clinic as a resident, but we didn't, this was the 80s, and by the time I was running the ER, it was the 90s, and we didn't we didn't use as many vaccines, and we did practice safety measures, such as, if it was a premature child, we waited till the child was actually the corrected age, considering their prematurity. We didn't vaccinate kids with fevers. We didn't vaccinate women who were even thinking of getting pregnant in the next 6 months. So we had a lot of rules around it. And I left medicine for a while. I was living in Israel in the food industry. I came back with a cat, one of my animals, and had to vaccinate my cat in order to get into the country with the cat. And the cat had been really healthy. And within receiving the 5 or 6 vaccinations, she developed asthma, cardiac murmur, and her teeth rotted and fell out. And the veterinarians explained to me that this was a vaccine reaction. And I was like, what? Like, wow, I had no idea. So fast forward, I started training also in alternative medicine. I'm a classically trained homeopath. I work in nutrition. And some of my patients were veterinarians. And one of my patients explained to me that he was shocked to hear that thimerosal was in vaccinations, and he said in 1983 the FDA removed thimerosal from veterinary vaccinations because the research showed that the animals behaved really oddly when they received thimerosal. 1983 for vets, for the veterinary shots for animals. So I started thinking, okay, well, and I knew vaccines were risky. I saw kids with febrile seizures and sudden heart attack or sudden infant respiratory distress, and they would stop breathing and come into the ER, and they had been in the vaccine clinic that day. So I knew that vaccines were problematic for some people, and they can cause reactions. That's what I knew and I understood. And so I didn't vaccinate my child because at that point I was like, well, I'm a homeopath. I want him to get measles, mumps, chickenpox, and pertussis, and I'll deal with it. I'm not afraid of those things. I've treated them numerous times. But it was in 2010 when I entered a master's program in disaster medical response. I had been going to Haiti for the earthquake, and so I did this master's. I was offered a free ride through the State Department, where they don't know what they paid for. And we started studying flu vaccine clinics, and it was flu vaccine clinics. Flu vaccine doesn't really work. So I did my research on flu vaccines, found the Cochrane collaboration studies, called Tom Jefferson, called Peter Doshi. So these are people who've done research to show these things are very ineffective. And it's an organization that collaborates together, and they take no industry money. And so it was only in 2010 that I realized that the regulatory agencies were completely corrupted, and that academia was being bought out and sold, that white coats were for sale. I had no idea. I truly had no idea. I just thought vaccines are dangerous for some kids, but they do good things, and, that the system wasn't corrupted. I really did not know the system was corrupted until 2010. And I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole, and I would be up late at night emailing people like Mary Holland and some other people who are involved in this fight, and I would say, stop me, like, God help me. I would wake up and say, I wish this, is this for real? I wish this wasn't happening, because I can't believe this information. I don't even want to know it. That's how disturbing it has been going on this ride. I'm used to the dark and disturbing information now, and I don't really let it affect me very much. But that is really how I came to this point. And in fact, the head of my department made it very clear, we want you to continue exposing the corruption in policymaking, in health policymaking. We want you to continue exposing the corruption in vaccine health policymaking, and we're okay with you doing that for the rest of the 2 years. Just make it appropriate for the course. And that is what I did. And the movie is a culmination of my research in my master's on all the different people that I interviewed regarding ethical issues, corruption issues, whistleblowing issues, scientific issues. And that's really how I came to this fight and evolved to the position where I was being flown out last year, saying lots of crazy things at the rally. I mean, for those of you who saw that shitstorm, let's just say it. And it started with me actually being flown out with a day's notice to Minnesota to testify for a similar bill, not quite as draconian. And I had 10 minutes to talk, and I somehow managed to get a lot of information in 10 minutes. And it was so much information that the next day, my audio file went missing. It was the first time in the Senate, in the state capitol's history, that they lost an audio file of a hearing. And they had to drop the bill. But 6 weeks later, the audio file was found, and it went viral, and the rest is history. I was flown to Texas. I was flown to California, where I was barred from speaking, and flown to Vermont, and I'm expecting that there's going to be a few trips coming up for me soon. But my website is disease-reversal.com, and I'm just going to add that the corruption that we see and the distortion of reality in vaccines is the truth in every aspect of medicine and the health sciences. We are at a place where articles are being retracted by editors of journals who are completely in pharma's pockets, like Gregory Poland. We are seeing articles that have been on PubMed since 1972 disappear by the NIH. And this is what is happening. This is a very scary time we are living in, and this has upped the ante in the last few weeks. So at that good note,
How many people know about the CDC whistleblower cover-up? Okay, all right. Well, we'll let Dr. Andy Wakefield tell us his story.
Right, I'm Andy Wakefield. Through the 90s, I ran a large research team at the Royal Free Hospital in London. Part of the University of London, our specific interest was inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. We became very interested in measles, natural patterns of exposure and vaccine exposure, and Crohn's disease risk. We published a paper in the Lancet in 1995, and on the back of that paper, which linked the single measles vaccine to Crohn's disease, I got a series of calls from parents saying that my child was perfectly well, they had an MMR vaccine, they lost all of their acquired skills, and they became ultimately autistic. And I said, I know nothing about autism, how can I help? And they said, well, my child has terrible gastrointestinal problems, they're failing to thrive, they're in pain, I know they're in pain, I'm their mother, and I can tell even though they've lost the ability to speak. They have bloating, they have diarrhea 12 times a day, and the doctor says that's just autism. And clearly it wasn't. And the way I was trained in medicine was invested in the patient's story or the parent's story, in particular because no one knows a child better than their mother, certainly much better than any public health doctor or pediatrician. And so, based upon that very formal classical training in medicine, I took their story seriously. We investigated it, and we did colonoscopy, upper endoscopy on these children, and found that the parents were absolutely right. They had an inflammatory bowel disease. They'd been suffering for years, but unable to articulate that pain except through self-injury or aggression. And so that when we treated that disease, when it was treated in the way that we would treat inflammatory bowel disease, with anti-inflammatories or special diets, then the children improved dramatically, not just from the gastrointestinal perspective, but also from the cognitive perspective. It was rather like a sort of Lorenzo's oil situation, and it was fascinating. And being academics, we said that didn't happen, so we did it again, and it happened again, and we did it 180 times. By the time I'd left the Royal Free, and it happened on virtually every occasion. And what that confirmed, what that reaffirmed to me, is that the parents were right. The medical profession was almost exclusively wrong. Every prediction, every statement it had made about autism, that it was permanent, lifelong, that it was untreatable, incurable, that it was in fact the mother's fault for hating a child and wanting them dead, all of these things that medicine comes up with because it has no explanation, it cannot offer anything better, and so it puts the blame on someone else, and that's what medicine did in this case. And so when the parents said my child regressed after a vaccine, we took that extremely seriously, we investigated, and many, many years later I am completely convinced the parents once again were right. The medical profession was wrong, remains wrong. We were interested at the time in pattern of exposure. One of the common questions that we got is, why do all children get MMR vaccine and why do only some develop autism? Well, not all smokers develop lung cancer. This is just one of those idiosyncrasies of medicine, and we were interested in cofactors, something about that modified the pattern of exposure, and one of those was age of exposure. We know that the age of exposure to an infection determines the outcome from that infection. The younger you are, the greater the risk of, say, an adverse outcome from measles infection. So we put forward the hypothesis that in autism, one of the risks was younger age of exposure to measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Not the only risk, but certainly a major determinant of that risk. And we shared that hypothesis with the CDC and with the US Congress back in the early 2000s. And the CDC went away and tested that hypothesis. And in the interim, let me just, in really 20 years that I've been involved in autism, these children, the bowel disease, the aberrant bowel findings, bowel bacteria that are clearly altered in children with autism has become the most common research finding. In other words, the science has borne out exactly what we published in The Lancet in 1998. However, because the bowel disease was synonymous in the minds of many people with vaccine injury, it had to be crushed, it had to be suppressed, and it had to be ignored. And so pediatricians, pediatric gastroenterologists did not do their job. They put their own careers before their patients because they said, I know you may be right, I know your child's suffering, but this isn't going to be good for me, so could you go and find another doctor? That is what has happened. So for many, many years, these children have suffered needlessly. And they've suffered because they had to discredit the bowel disease in order to protect the vaccination. So all of this would have remained just the same. It would have got worse. Now we'd have had mandatory vaccination throughout the country, and the situation would have escalated to the predicted 1 in 2 children born in 2032 having autism. That is what we face right now based upon the CDC's own numbers. Were it not for one man. One man is Dr. William Thompson, senior scientist from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who some 14 years ago was one of a group of doctors there who tested the hypothesis that younger age of MMR vaccination was indeed a risk for autism, and that's exactly what they found. They spent the next 14 years concealing that risk. He was so perplexed by that concealment that ultimately he came forward to a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Brian Hooker, a man with a vaccine-injured son, and confessed to him the full extent of the crime, provided to him all of the data outputs, all of the analysis plans, all of the internal email communications going right up the hierarchy to the very top of the CDC, alerting them to the fact that younger age of MMR vaccination was a major risk factor for autism. They put millions and millions of children in harm's way, healthy children, in order to protect what? Their own policy, their own credibility, and their partners in the industry. And that is the greatest medical fraud in the history of the world. Why? Because these people were charged with caring for these children, for their well-being. This is not a drug that's being used in end-stage cancer where the pharmaceutical industry just fiddles some figures to give it a better appearance. These are all healthy children in the world who are being mandated to be given these vaccines, with over 200 new vaccines going through the process of approval and licensing right now, and many of those will find their way onto the schedule. They did this deliberately, they did it callously, they did it recklessly, and countless numbers of children have paid a huge, huge price. So, until the day I die, we'll never walk away from this issue. And I realized that some years ago, to beat the media, you had to become the media. And I teamed up with my friend and colleague, Dale Bigtree, the front producer on our new documentary, which brings to the public, to those who don't know or don't care or don't think this is their problem, Dr. Williams' story, Dr. Thompson's story, his confession, and the true extent and nature of the fraud at the CDC. This is not an isolated incident, and I believe that it will open the can on many, many other such incidents that have happened at the CDC. They cannot be trusted. They are an utter, utter disgrace, and it is my job to try and expose them.